Good morning. I am Senior Master Sergeant Bonnie Rushing, presenting on behalf of our research team at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, which includes Viceroy Scholars Cole Nelson and Olga Karpoyan, Dr. Shupai Shi, and our U.S. CyberRecon mentor, Christopher Raven O'Keefe. Today, I'll present our response to the CyberRecon 2025 challenge. How are adversary military forces susceptible to cognitive attacks? We approach this question by building a metric-driven model that quantifies susceptibility using media influence and press freedom scores. Let's go over the overview for this presentation. Here's what I'll cover. I'll start with key background concepts and related work. Then I'll define our research question and the problem space. From there, I'll walk through our methodology, show you our calculator, and use Russia as a case study. Finally, we'll wrap up with key takeaways and next steps. We're aiming to shift the subjective assessments of cognitive attack risk to measurable, evidence-based estimates that can support decision-making in the information environment. So let's move on to the introduction. Cognitive attacks fall under operations in the information environment, or OIE. These attacks manipulate subconscious thought, often through disinformation or social engineering, and can influence decisions without the target realizing it. We've built upon our 2023 U.S. Air Force Academy war game, where our participants were exposed to simulated media, news broadcasts, social media posts, and much more. The results clearly showed that trust in media sources heavily influenced military decision-making. That insight became the baseline for our model. To measure global media openness, we use the Press Freedom Score, or PFS, published annually by Reporters Without Borders. PFS captures each country's censorship metrics and how freely journalists can operate. Low PFS often means state-controlled narratives. These are dominating the information space, which directly impacts susceptibility to media influence. In environments with limited press freedom, people are more likely to trust what's familiar, even if it is manipulated. We call this the rally effect, a kind of forced loyalty driven by lack of alternatives. So let's look at the problem. Our research question is, how can we quantify the susceptibility of military forces to these attacks, especially in adversary nations where information is tightly controlled? So you can see the research question there at the bottom of the slide. How are adversary military forces susceptible to cybercognitive attacks? We had 4 objectives: define a cognitive influence metric, integrate PFS and media trust, simulate potential influence outcomes, and build a usable tool that analysts can apply directly in the field or in strategic planning. While cybercognitive attacks are hard to detect, their effects, especially on our decision-making, can be strategic game changers. We need a way to measure, compare, and ultimately anticipate how susceptible military forces are across different countries. So let's look at the methodology we used. Our methodology unfolds in 4 steps. First, we collect each country's PFS from Reporters Without Borders. Second, we use trust data from our war game to create a baseline for U.S. service members, how much media influences their decisions. Third, we define a linear metric, S, that relates PFS to susceptibility, hence the S, across 4 different media types. Finally, we resolve for slope and intercept values to estimate how successful cognitive attacks would be in any country. We use an equation to estimate susceptibility, like I said, S, which equals alpha times PFS plus Bravo. Alpha captures how sharply susceptibility rises as press freedom score decreases. We adjust B based on media source trust data initially gathered from our war game study at USAFA. We found that as PFS decreases, trust in state media increases, making those populations more vulnerable to successful cognitive attacks. This insight is especially useful for predicting predicting how adversary forces might respond to OIE efforts. So let's look at the calculator that our team created. To operationalize our findings, we developed the Cognitive Influence Calculator. It's a web-based tool that takes a country's PFS, their press freedom score, and outputs predicted susceptibility rates across media types such as local news, local social media, foreign news, etc., and their overall decision influence. The tool can be used to compare nations, assess temporal shifts in cognitive risk, or support real-time planning and course of action development in joint operations. Let's say you're planning a cognitive campaign or counter OIE mission. This tool helps you model likely outcomes based on how much a nation's military trusts the media and how tightly that media is controlled in that country. So let's look at Russia for our example of case study. Before 2022, Russian citizens had some access to independent media, and trust in the government was relatively low. But after the Ukraine invasion, the state cracked down, criminalizing dissent, eliminating non-government outlets for media within their country. Russia's PFS dropped from about 50 to under 30. At the same time, the approval of Putin surged from 28 to over 78%. This is the classic rally around the flag effect. When we plug this into the calculator, the model shows Russia's susceptibility to cognitive attacks rising sharply. The paradox is this, though. The more controlled the media, the harder it is to reach the target audience. But the more damage you can do if you succeed. Russia shows that once you suppress alternatives, your audience becomes hyper-receptive to the received narratives, even if it's harmful. So let's move on to our conclusion. So here's the big picture. Here's the big picture for us. Countries with restricted media aren't just harder to reach. They're actually more fragile as well. If a cognitive attack does succeed, its effects are more powerful because the population has fewer alternative narratives to fall back on and to consider. Our metric offers a practical way to quantify that risk. It supports US CyberRecon and DoD in better understanding how adversary militaries might respond to cognitive manipulation and which information environments are the most vulnerable. Next steps include refining the model, expanding it to nonlinear relationships, and incorporating more nuanced data sets from additional countries and contexts. But even now, this tool can inform planning in the cognitive domain. This work offers a data-driven foundation for modeling influence operation in especially closed societies. Our cognitive influence calculator is ready for broader use, and we welcome future partnerships to refine and expand its impact. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take your questions. And here are our references. Thank you.